Prince Andrew is demanding a trial by jury and has formally denied all the allegations against him as he gave a court in New York his official response to allegations of sexual assault.
What she shares is not just gossip. It's a first-hand perspective that highlights the pressures, the demands, and the character traits of a man who has spent his life both basking in royal privilege and battling public criticism. For viewers who think they already know the Duke of York, this testimony will either confirm suspicions or completely shift perceptions. In this documentary-style account, we'll explore the Maid's candid stories, some surprising, others troubling, and uncover the truths that few dared to speak aloud. The portrait that emerges may shock you, and it certainly raises new questions about who Prince Andrew really is when the cameras are off and the palace doors are closed. The Maid begins her story by describing the atmosphere of working in the royal household. At first, she recalls, the position felt like an extraordinary honor. To be part of the team serving the Queen's family carried immense prestige, and most staff approached their duties with quiet pride. But very quickly, she noticed that serving Prince Andrew was unlike working for other members of the royal family. According to her, the Duke of York carried an aura of entitlement that was impossible to ignore. Where other royals might greet staff with a nod or a brief word of thanks, Andrew often acted as though their presence was invisible. It wasn't that he was openly cruel at first, she explained, but rather that he expected perfection without ever acknowledging the effort behind it. The Maid remembered specific routines that stood out. Andrew reportedly had exact preferences for how his clothing was laid out, how his tea was prepared, and even how the curtains were drawn in his room each morning. Everything had to be precise, down to the smallest detail, she said. If the order wasn't followed exactly, there would be a complaint, sometimes raised in a tone that made everyone nervous. She also highlighted the sense of hierarchy that Andrew enforced. Staff felt as though they had to tread carefully, avoiding mistakes at all costs. It was a job where you learned quickly to keep your head down, she revealed. Because if you drew attention to yourself, it often wasn't in a good way. While some of the prince's demands could be chalked up to aristocratic habits, others left her unsettled. There were occasions, she claimed, when Andrew's impatience boiled over into bursts of temper. These moments didn't always result in shouting, but the sharpness in his tone and the way he dismissed staff could leave lasting embarrassment. It wasn't about the mistake, she reflected. It was about how small he could make you feel for making it. Still, she admitted that working in the palace was a complex experience. Alongside the challenges, there were glimpses of Andrew's lighter side. There were moments when he could be funny, even charming, she said, recalling evenings when he seemed relaxed and open with those around him. But those moments were unpredictable, often overshadowed by the expectation of flawless service. In her view, Andrew's behavior reflected both his royal upbringing and his personal struggles. He had lived his whole life being treated differently, she explained. It shaped him into someone who expected that difference wherever he went. This first chapter of her account lays the foundation for understanding Andrew's true behavior, less about dramatic scandals and more about the daily realities of life behind palace walls. It is in these details, she insists, that the real man is revealed. The Maid's story takes a sharper turn when she begins describing Prince Andrew's temper. While she acknowledged that not every day was stormy, the moments when frustration boiled over were etched into her memory. His temper could flare without warning, she said. It wasn't always shouting, though that happened too. It was the way he looked at you, the way he dismissed you, as if you were beneath even his scorn. One particular instance still stands out. She recalled preparing Andrew's breakfast tray one morning. The orange juice was freshly squeezed, the toast buttered to his specifications. Yet the eggs, though perfectly cooked, were apparently not warm enough for his liking. He didn't simply say, "This isn't right," she explained. He pushed the tray away with such force that it clattered against the table and demanded it be done again. For us, mistakes were treated like insults. She stressed that it wasn't just about food or service, it was about control. Andrew expected every detail to be executed precisely as he envisioned, and when reality fell short, his irritation could fill the room. It wasn't just disappointment, she noted. It was as though he couldn't understand how someone could fail to meet his standard, even though his standards sometimes shifted without warning. What troubled her most wasn't just the temper itself, but the ripple effect it caused among staff. Younger employees, especially those new to palace life, were often reduced to tears. There was this constant undercurrent of fear, she recalled. We'd whisper among ourselves before going into his quarters, double and triple checking everything, hoping to avoid setting him off. Yet the maid was careful to point out that Andrew wasn't cruel in a calculated way. In her eyes, he lacked self-awareness more than empathy. I don't think he realized how intimidating he was, she said. He lived in a world where his word carried weight. And maybe he didn't stop to think about how his reactions impacted those of us just trying to do our jobs. Still, there were times when his anger felt deeply personal. She described how Andrew could be cutting with words, making staff feel incompetent over minor errors. You could spend hours perfecting a task, she said, but if one thing went wrong, that was all he would notice. And he made sure you knew it. Adding to the strain was the broader context of Andrew's public life. The maid admitted that during periods when his name was in the headlines, especially amid controversies, his moods grew noticeably darker. You could tell when the press had written something about him, she said. The whole household felt the tension. Those days, he seemed angrier, quicker to snap, as though the world outside the palace had bled into our halls. Despite the difficult moments, she believed that Andrew's temper was not rooted in cruelty for cruelty's sake, but in an upbringing that shielded him from accountability. When you grow up as a prince, with everything done for you, you don't learn patience in the same way others do, she observed. Mistakes, even small ones, feel like disrespect. And that's how he treated them. Her testimony paints a picture of a man used to absolute control, whose sharp temper reflected both privilege and pressure. It is in these moments, she insists, that his true behavior was clearest, far from the polished royal figure the public imagined. If Prince Andrew's temper revealed his impatience, his private routines revealed just how unusual life in his world could be. The maid explained that working for him meant navigating not only a strict hierarchy, but also a collection of peculiar habits that often left staff bewildered. One of the first things she noticed was Andrew's insistence on absolute precision in how his belongings were arranged. Shoes, for instance, had to be placed in exact alignment, facing the same direction, with laces tucked neatly inside. If they were even slightly out of place, he would call us back in, she recalled. It wasn't a request, it was a demand to correct it immediately. Then there was his clothing. Andrew reportedly disliked dressing himself, preferring instead to have staff lay out his outfits, right down to cufflinks and accessories. The maid claimed he often requested multiple changes of clothes throughout the day, depending on his schedule, mood, or even the weather. Sometimes we'd have 3 or 4 outfits lined up before breakfast was over, she said with a weary laugh. He wanted options at all times. But perhaps the most striking detail was his approach to personal care. According to her, Andrew had specific expectations for how his bath should be prepared. The water temperature had to be exact, and even the towels were to be folded in a particular way. It was as though nothing was too small to be controlled, she noted. He wanted his environment shaped exactly to his liking. Food, too, carried its own set of rules. Andrew reportedly favored particular brands, specific cuts of meat, and even demanded that fruit be arranged a certain way on the plate. If the bananas were too ripe or if the grapes weren't cut from the stem, it could cause an issue, the maid explained. We learned to anticipate his preferences, sometimes going to absurd lengths to make sure everything was just so. Beyond these demands, she revealed quirks that bordered on the eccentric. For example, Andrew was said to dislike writing his own notes or carrying small items, tasks he often delegated to staff even when unnecessary. It wasn't laziness exactly, she said. It was as if he believed those tasks simply weren't meant for him. They belonged to someone else. To outsiders, these behaviors might seem indulgent or even childish, but within the palace they were normalized. That was the life of service, she explained. We didn't question why he wanted things a certain way. We just did it. Still, sometimes in private, we couldn't help but shake our heads. What struck her most, however, was how different Andrew could appear depending on his mood. On days when he was in good spirits, his habits seemed less like demands and more like quirks of a man who had grown up in unimaginable privilege. He could even be affable, cracking jokes or making light conversation. But on difficult days, those same quirks became battlegrounds, each detail another chance for frustration. For the maid, these routines revealed a deeper truth.